So we have 2 days ahead of us with presentations, discussion, networking opportunities. So let's get learning and talk about our keynote speaker this morning, who is Doug Laney. He is a Data and Analytics Strategy Innovation Fellow at West Monroe Partners. West Monroe, for those of you who are geographically challenged, is not a city.
It is.
But not in Louisiana. That's. There was a social media post at one point from Doug saying, my West Monroe is not a city. So I just thought I'd mention that. He consults in business data and analytics leaders on conceiving and implementing new data-driven value streams. He actually coined this term, Infonomics, some years ago, and has written a couple of best-selling books. I know he's going to talk about that a little bit, and he's going to introduce us to some new stuff that he's been involved in. So join me in welcoming Doug Laney.
Come on down. Thank you. We're down the stairs. There we go. Morning, everyone. So you know the old expression, you know what they say, right? You've all heard that before, you know what they say. I've been spending my life trying to figure out who they is. My brother and I have been trying to figure out who they is. And I'm starting to get some ideas. So one of the expressions you may have heard is, you know what they say, you don't need to shower every day, right? And so I think I know who they is. They are the people who sell perfume and cologne and deodorant. So anyway, a little wisdom for this morning. So okay, got the mic on? Good. So funny story about the lavalier mics. I was asked to speak at the CIA some years ago on, they were having a joint intelligence briefing on big data. I told you I was going to tell this story. And the guy who introduced, and it was in what's called the bubble there at Laney. Anyone familiar with that? It's a great conference center, super sound system. And the guy who introduces me puts me on stage. They dim the lights so I can't see all the Mr. and Mrs. Smiths in the in the audience. And then guy goes off stage. I start speaking, and about 5 to 10 minutes in, you start to hear the sound of water rushing and toilets flushing. Right. So the guy had left his lavalier mic on when he went to the men's room, of all places at the CIA. So I couldn't talk over it. It was really loud, and the woman who's working the soundboard was doing this, pushing buttons and turning knobs and trying to get it to shut up. She couldn't. So I figured I had to say something, funny. I had 2 ideas. You can tell me if I used the right one. So the first idea was I said, you guys really do record everything. So, and then the other idea I had, which I may not have gotten out of there alive, and it was kind of topical at the time, which was I thought we had stopped waterboarding. So. Somebody said I should have said something about CIA leaks. So we have there's our clicker. All right, so let's jump in. So thank you, Mary, for introducing my books. There's what I'm going to talk about today. A lot of it comes from the Infonomics and the more recent Data Juice books. So Infonomics is a book about basically how to treat data as an asset, how to manage and monetize and measure it as an actual asset. There were a number of kind of use cases and real-world examples in that book, and folks asked me to maybe take all the use cases that I compiled and put them into a book. So some of you may know I'm a longtime Gartner analyst, and they said, "Hey, Doug, you're the big data guy. You came up with the 3 V's of big data. We want you to focus on big data in your research." And so people started asking questions. What is big data? And then the questions turned to, okay, how do we do big data? And then the questions turned to, all right, what do we do with all this big data? And I'm like, I don't know, analyze stuff. So I started collecting real world stories, and a dozen stories turned into 50 stories, turned into 500 stories. I now have about 1,000 stories in the collection. So even though my wife told me if I ever wrote another book after Infonomics, that it would have to be titled How I Use Big Data to Find My Next Wife. I said, how about I crowdsource it? And she said, what does that mean? I'm like, I'm going to find people to find the stories, and then I'm going to hire someone to kind of structure the stories in the same fashion, and then I'm going to conscript a bunch of friends in the industry, each to write a commentary on each of the stories. So that's what Data Juice is. It's not only a compilation of real-world kind of stories that are meant to inspire or shame organizations into doing more with their data, But there's some great commentaries after each story from academics and chief data officers and consultants, each who provide a commentary on what that organization probably went through to implement this idea, and maybe what they should do to kind of take it to the next level. So that's a bit about the books. And I'm going to come back to them a little bit later and give you all actually a little treat. All right, so let's talk about Infonomics. Maybe you've heard me talk about this before, but I think it bears repeating that the idea for Infonomics came from was inspired by an unfortunate and very sad event in American and global history, and that was the 9/11 terror attacks. After that time, some clients started contacting us, lamenting not only the tragic loss of life, but also the loss of their data. So they asked us, who do you call when you suffer some kind of loss? I know I'm in the right city for this. Who do you contact when you suffer? Insurance? The insurance companies, right. So these companies in the Twin Towers who had lost their data, this is in the days before offsite backups and clouds, so they actually lost their data, wanted to submit claims to their insurers for the value of the data they lost, and they needed a way to value that data because they hadn't done that before. So we had done some early work on valuing data and publishing data valuation models. So they reached out to us. They said, can you help us with this? We helped them value their data. They submitted their claims to their insurers, and the insurers said, sorry, we don't consider data to be property, therefore it's not covered by your P&C policies. I'm like, what? Really? Like, how is data not considered property? Well, it turns out that the policies were kind of unclear. There were a number of court cases that ensued, and actually court cases around the world in instances where people have lost data, companies have lost data, it's been stolen or misused. The insurance industry realized it was a bit exposed, so they updated the Commercial General Liability Policy template, the ISO did, the Insurance Service Office, to explicitly exclude electronic data from P&C policies. And when did they do that? They did that just a matter of weeks after 9/11, to add further insult to injury. Not to be outdone, the accounting profession said, hey, if the insurance industry is not going to recognize data as property and the courts are confused, like some courts had ruled that data should be considered property because it can be represented by bubbles on an optical disc. Other courts have said data shouldn't be considered property because, catch this, because electrons have negligible mass. Yeah, so. And so the accounting industry said, hey, we're not going to recognize data as an asset. You can no longer, even if you wanted to, put the value of your data on your balance sheet. So basically the keepers of the definition of what constitutes property and what constitutes an asset have doubled down on their antiquated notions that it's neither. And then the US government gets involved and they hold a hearing on how to evolve a 1930s style accounting system into the 21st century. So why 1930s? Well, that's when the asset classes were defined by the then nascent SEC on the heels of the Great Depression to help standardize financial reporting. And at that time, there was no reason to think about data as a separate asset class because all data was physical: papers, books, magazines, ledgers, Hollerith cards, if you remember those. So, here we are, because it was a US Senate committee hearing on that, you can imagine what the outcome of that was, which is, nothing. So that's where we are today, that the keepers of the definition of what constitutes an asset and property have really kind of doubled down on these antiquated and arcane notions that it's neither, while all of you and your organizations are trying to really do more about treating data as an asset and layering, putting it to work by layering advanced analytics and data science and AI on top of those applications. So fast forward, well, we'll fast forward in a minute, but then I asked the question, does data actually meet the criteria of an asset? No matter what definition you use, data meets the criteria of an asset. It's something that is owned and or controlled, exchangeable for cash. We often exchange data for cash, and well, data brokers certainly do. And then exchangeable for cash, owned and controlled, exchangeable for cash, and generates what accountants call probable future economic benefits. So really no argument that data meets the criteria of an asset. So, but I think it's more interesting to see what the investors think about data, and they actually favor data-centric companies that have enterprise data governance programs, that have chief data analytics and AI officers, those that have advanced analytics and AI programs. Those kinds of organizations are favored by 2 to 1 over others. So their market to book value is nearly 2 times higher than the market average. And companies that are data product companies that make a living selling data or licensing data or data derivatives of some kind have a market to book value that's nearly 3 times higher because, of course, they're making more value from an asset that is not on the books. So that's sort of obvious there. All right, so this leads us to the topic of Infonomics, just kind of a primer on that. We're talking about monetizing, managing, and measuring data as an asset, and the kind of way they all go together as a single kind of concept. They say you can't manage what you don't measure. And I think it follows that you can't monetize what you're not managing. So think about that in terms of any other asset that your organization has. If you're not managing it, if you're not measuring it, you're having a difficult time monetizing it or generating value from that asset. So what do we mean when we talk about data monetization? Data monetization is this process of generating measurable value streams from available data assets. So a little bit to unpack there. First, it's a process. There should be an ongoing or at least a periodic process that your organization is going through. And at West Monroe, this is what I'm involved in pretty much full time, helping organizations generate ideas and develop those ideas. Beyond just building pretty pie charts and dashing dashboards. It's also, we also talk about measurable value streams because we're already doing a lot of things with our data, but most organizations are not measuring the impact of that. They're not connecting the dots between the data that was used and the outcomes via enhanced business process performance. And then from available data assets kind of refers to the notion that we can monetize data that comes from external sources as well, and we should be looking at external data to supplement our own and generate more value. And what we're finding is that AI is really a primary enabler of data monetization. Yes, we can use reporting and analytics and advanced analytics, but actually layering AI applications on top of these data sources generates even greater value. And I'll kind of show you what that maturity model looks like in a moment. Okay, so there's a lot of myths for data monetization that data has to be sold to be monetized, that you can only monetize your own data, that what else we have? The only data that's used has any value. That's not true as well. We actually find organizations monetizing data that's just latent, and I'll show you one of those patterns in a moment. But the bottom here is, I think, really interesting that due to privacy regulations, we can only monetize, we can't monetize our customer data. We hear that all the time, and it actually just shows kind of a lack of creativity, and I'll get back to that in a moment. But you really kind of need to work through those and really ought to be part of your data literacy and data fluency activities to educate people on kind of overcoming those mental barriers to what is data monetization. And we may call it different things in different organizations. We may refer to it as data enablement or data commercialization or data product development or whatever's comfortable for your organization. I'm fine with. I'm not doctrinaire. So what is our process? So our process for monetizing data it kind of breaks down like this. This is kind of a really high-level view of our overall approach. First, we want to generate ideas for ways to generate value from data. We want to assess and prioritize them. So I'm going to kind of focus in on those this morning. But then after that, you move into kind of the second phase, which is more of the kind of the design phase, where we're actually market testing the ideas, prototyping them, identifying the actual data assets that we're going to be integrating, designing that data product or that data monetization idea, specifying our technical requirements, and if this is going to be something that particularly if it's something that we're going to be selling externally, some functionality or data that we're going to be selling or licensing externally, we want to think about how we're going to do that. Is our existing sales team, is our existing marketing team going to be able to handle that? Or do we need to, introduce new players into that mix? And then the third phase is kind of the engineering stuff, building the data products, any underlying infrastructure needs, setting up the marketing and sales and support team, and providing program and project support throughout. So if this may look kind of familiar to you, yes, it actually represents a very familiar kind of new product introduction approach, maybe with some nuances that are kind of specific to data. But listen, if you know me, I'm not about reinventing the wheel. I'm about readapting the wheel to other uses. So that's pretty much what the whole book Infonomics was about. other ways that we manage and monetize and measure data, measure other assets and apply that to data. So same thing here. This is a kind of an approach that we've adapted from traditional product management approaches. But again, I want to get into the first phase here a little bit and show you how we do that. So the first phase here, I'm going to step back so I can actually see what I'm doing here, is capitalizing on the unique economic qualities of data. So it's hard to go a day or a week or a month without hearing somebody talk about data being the new oil. I'm sure you'll hear this a lot, the next few days, and she's laughing at me. So yeah, it's one of my hot buttons or soapboxes or pet peeves. And listen, I understand that. The analogy sort of works at a macro level, that yes, data is a driver of the economy today, especially as we get into this world of AI. Data is especially a driver of the economy today, much as oil has been over the last century or so. But it misses the point that the data has unique attributes that oil doesn't have. When you consume a drop of oil, what happens? It dissipates, turns into heat and energy and pollutants. And when we consume a drop of oil, we can only consume it one way at a time. And when we consume a drop of oil, it doesn't create more oil. So data is very different. Data is what economists would call, what I call a non-rivalrous. That means we can use it multiple ways simultaneously. Non-depleting, doesn't get used up when we use it. And is progenitive. That is, typically, whenever we're using data, we're in a position to be able to capture more data about wherever and however that data was used. So the companies that are embracing this, whether they're doing so explicitly or implicitly, are really the ones that are thriving in the economy today, especially those who are layering now not just basic analytics or even data science, but AI on top of that are the ones who are really, really poised to thrive. So the next thing we want to do is apply various patterns of data monetization. So kind of what I'm talking about overall here is our workshop approach. So we'll go into an organization and we'll run a workshop. And these are the kind of the things that we'll go through during that workshop, just to give you an idea. So we want to apply the various patterns of data monetization. So as I mentioned, I've been collecting these stories for years, kind of done a meta-analysis of all these stories and determined that they fall into really two classes of use case. And the first are indirect data monetization, and the second are direct data monetization. And I know my friend Barb Wixom just wrote a great book, and she kind of classifies them in three different ways. This is the way I've classified it, dating back 5, 6, 7 years. And we actually continue adding to this, because as we discover new patterns, you'll notice there's some patterns here that are not in the Infonomics book. But indirect data monetization is about how we might be using data internally to drive measurable value. Direct data monetization is about how we're exposing data externally to drive value, usually in the form of cash or some kind of commercial consideration. So indirect data monetization can take the form of improving processes or reducing risk or developing new products or building and solidifying partner relationships. Or I know I mentioned that data can't be a balance sheet asset, but actually, due to some accounting shenanigans, you can actually move your data and digital assets into a separate holding company and value that business. Remember, investors love data companies. So we can say, hey, part of our company is a data company, and then value that company, and then use that to increase the value of the parent company's share price, or valuation. So this is something that we're helping organizations with, is moving their data and digital assets into a separate holding company, valuing that, and so forth. So we're doing it like with the European Football Club and some others of interest. And then direct data monetization, again, is where we're sharing data externally. The first one I put on there is bartering with data, because when you barter with data, there are actually potentially some advantages in doing so, rather than selling it for cash, because remember, data is a non-balance sheet asset, usually. So if we're exchanging data with others and getting some kind of commercial consideration back, I'm not here to give tax advice. West Monroe does not give tax advice. But it may or may not be taxable, depending on how conservative you are. So for example, you go into the grocery store and you scan your loyalty card, right? And you get a discount on your groceries. But we all know what's really happening, which is we're getting free food in return for information about us and our purchase, right? I mean, that's a preordained kind of barter transaction. So the same sort of thing is happening a lot in the B2B world. It could also enhance our existing products or services with data. Think about any product or service that you offer today, or maybe you offered 10 years ago, and how you've enhanced it by baking data into it, or maybe de-informationalizing it, extracting data from it. We can license our raw data ourselves or through data brokers or marketplaces. We can sell insights or analysis or reports. A lot of organizations do that. And then there's this notion of inverted data monetization. Remember, I talked about not being able to monetize our customer data. Well, again, kind of showing a lack of creativity. If you take that idea and kind of flip it on its head and say, listen, I can't sell you my customer data, but I can sell your stuff to my customers without ever exposing who they are. So, for example, we're working with a hospital who knows who its diabetes patients are, can't sell that data to anyone, but what they can do is they can introduce to those patients healthy meal plans and gym memberships and at-home, glucose monitoring test kits, and either take a cut of that action, a referral fee, or if you're a hospital, maybe you're doing it as a data for good kind of example, or to reduce hospital returns. So, and Facebook does this as well. So Facebook supposedly doesn't sell, or Meta doesn't sell our data anymore, right? Supposedly, and so, but what they do is they introduce to us products and services that are of interest to us based on our likes and comments and posts. What else do we have here? And then there's collateralizing data to secure loans. So remember I said you don't actually have to use data to generate value from it. Well, one way is to put it on the balance sheet, as I showed earlier. Another way is to use it as collateral, right? And increasingly companies that are data rich and cash poor are finding that they can get loans for their data assets. There's actually a company that we partner with at West Monroe that has a fund that will issue that loan, and they have a valuation model to establish the level of collateral needed. So, and then they've got a technology that will sit on your systems and actually escrow your data on a daily basis into a secured cloud environment, so that if you default, they have access to that data, to use that data. So a lot of different really innovative ways to leverage data assets. I'll share some examples here in a moment. Next is I want to target our business drivers and optimize the business functions. So we want to look at what are the key business functions for the organization and kind of target those. Everybody kind of wants to target revenue and risks and quality and cost, but those drivers are hard to target directly. We probably want to target some of those secondary drivers or value propositions to achieve the latter. Next is, there's some great examples. Westpac created the proverbial 360-degree view of a customer, and from that they're able to better target their customers and generated about $25 million of revenue, incremental revenue in the first nine months. Other kind of examples that people forget about, we moved recently, and when you sell your house, it goes into the MLS database, right? And if if you've done this recently, you start to get mailers from the moving companies and the moving box companies and the fly-by-night mortgage companies, and so the only company that didn't reach out to us was our own bank. And I'm like how? So what a missed opportunity to introduce us to our new branch. Can we offer you a mortgage, a home equity line? Can we print you new checks? Can we help you move your stuff in your safe deposit box? To kind of preserve and maintain or enhance the relationship. But no, just I bank with one of the largest banks in the world. Nothing from them, and I've been a client of theirs for decades. So I was thinking, what a terrible missed opportunity, and like. How easy, stupid, simple would it have been for them to hire a high school programmer, give him or her a can of Red Bull and some snacks, and say, hey, match the MLS database to our customer list on a daily basis so that we can reach out to our customers. Everybody's looking for a reason to reach out to their customers. So understand that customer journey. Increasingly, we can use AI to anticipate that customer journey and get a better sense of where a customer is headed to be able to reach out to them at the right time with the right kind of offering. Addressing the wants and needs of customers and suppliers. So even beyond our own organization, if we're going to think about monetizing data externally, who are some of those organizations, and let's understand those personas and think about what their wants and needs are with respect to the data or insights that we can offer. Next is thinking about the range of data sources that we have. So we also in these workshops want to explore the data that the organization has, its enterprise data, what external data could be valuable, from open data sources, syndicated data sources, web content. You can imagine there's billions and billions of sources of data out there. There's thousands of data brokers. There's at least 10 million published data sets that are open data, according to McKinsey. And then there's dark data that you've kind of forgotten about or used, just that you've maybe used for a single purpose and archived. I'll share an example of that in a moment. But unfortunately, most organizations have an entire department dedicated to procuring office supplies, but not a single department or individual dedicated to procuring data supplies. And I think in today's world, that's a classic misstep. And so we're actually using AI, generative AI, to identify external data sources that are potentially valuable to a particular client. And then hypothesizing, so we want to create hypotheses about what we can do with data. So we want to take kind of basic questions that the business has, like, what did we sell last quarter? Or that's interesting. But let's ask maybe a more diagnostic question. Why did we only sell that much last quarter? Or more of a predictive question, how much are we going to sell next quarter so that we can optimize our resources? And then maybe a more prescriptive question, which is what can we do to sell 20% more next quarter? So you can see these questions get much more interesting and valuable and actionable as we move off to the right. So during these workshops, we want to kind of take the basic questions that they have and figure out how to enhance them. And then more and more today, we're very focused on how can we use data to optimize or automate or digitalize processes, particularly using AI. We do those hypotheses. We break them down into various business functions and types of questions. We run some maybe intramural competition or run some exercises to see who can come up with kind of the coolest idea for any of those cells. And then finally, we share examples. So the reason I published the Data Juice book was to share examples. There are a lot of great examples. Mary D, I don't have a clock up here. How am I doing? 15 minutes. I'm talking too fast. All right. So, time for questions. So some of my favorite examples, maybe you've heard or seen them before. Walmart realized it had a great search engine, and so they took into account tens of millions of searches per month and help people find what they're looking for online. But one week, people were searching for a particular search term that when they investigated it, they realized what was going on. People were searching for the word house, and it was taking them to dog houses and housewares and doll houses, and it wasn't at all what people were looking for. It actually coincided, you may have guessed, with the week that a particular television show premiered, right? The medical drama House, starring Hugh Laurie doing such a great American accent. I didn't even know he was British, so for years. I'm easily fooled. So Walmart realized that what people were looking for was the box DVD set or the ability to stream previous seasons. And in doing so, they realized, hey, our search engine is not taking into account what's happening in the world. It's staring at its own navel, right? But not aware of what's happening in the world. And when they upgraded the search engine to incorporate social media trends into the search engine, they're able to reduce shopping cart abandonment across the board by like 10 to 15%. So in Walmart terms, that's like $1 billion a year, right, of additional sales. Infinity Insurance, I talked about dark data, realized they were sitting on a gold mine of adjuster reports. You submit a claim, the insurance company adjuster investigates the claim, then determines what to pay out or not. And so what they realized was that in these adjuster reports were indicators of likely fraud, inconsistencies, wording, lacking information, things like that. And when they trained a system to identify those indicators of fraud, they were able to then subrogate or reclaim tens of millions of dollars of previously paid out fraudulent claims, and then bake that model into their claims processing system to catch fraudulent claims up front twice as often as they were able to before. Lockheed Martin heard me speak some years ago on the topic of dark data, and dark data being that unused or underutilized data, or kind of forgotten about. And somebody in the audience said, hey, what dark data do we have? It turns out he was a CIO of a major systems integrator. And I said, well, you're probably sitting on years and years of archived emails, right? Which, that's great. Maybe you're keeping them around for compliance reasons or whatnot. But I said, in those emails, especially those that are related to particular projects, are indicators of problems that those projects have had. Or you can get early warning signs of scope or budget or personnel or technology-related issues on these projects. And if you trained a system to look for those, you could get early warning signs. So that's exactly what Lockheed Martin went and did. They took that idea and they presented this at a Gartner event a few years ago, and they showed how they're assessing project documentation and project communications to identify those issues earlier. They claim they now have 3 times greater foresight into project issues and are saving hundreds of millions of dollars a year in cost overruns, which is great because as taxpayers, we all kind of appreciate that, right? Dollar General is an example of a company that is monetizing its data directly. They're monetizing insights, shopping basket analysis and inventory levels and pricing and whatnot. They make that available to their CPG partners in return for cash or other kinds of commercial considerations like delivery costs or whatever. Allstate Insurance came to me some years ago and they said, I can talk about this because this is public now. They said, hey, one of the automobile companies wants to use our data to build better, safer cars, our claims data, but compliance, it's a great idea. They would build better, safer cars. Consumers would get better, safer cars. The insurance company would get perhaps lower loss ratios. And so, great idea, but the compliance people stepped in and said, hey, we're what Allstate's motto is, right? We're the good hands company. We can't be seen as selling our customer data, even if we anonymize it, redact it, aggregate it, whatever. So I said to them, this is not a technology issue. This is not a brand issue. This is where kind of strategic thinking comes in. I said, not a technology issue, it's not a brand issue, it's not a data issue, it's a brand issue. So why don't you take this idea off brand and create a separate company or a joint venture to do this? Because it's a great idea, no one's gonna fault you for it. I understand it's not entirely consistent with your brand, but there's a great kind of quid pro quo as part of this idea. So they went and 7 months later launched the company Arity, which is a platform for Allstate and other insurance companies to monetize their data externally. Minute Maid gets a call from Chick-fil-A, and Chick-fil-A says, hey, the quality of your orange juice is great, but it's inconsistent region by region and season by season, so we need it to be all the same everywhere all the time, or else we're gonna move to, they threatened to move to Sunny Delight, which you tell me, I sound like an empty threat to me. But anyway, so Minute Maid, which is owned by Coca-Cola, hired some flavorologists, sicked the flavorologists on an orange, identified there are like 600 flavor components in an orange. They gathered all sorts of crop yields and cost pressures and satellite images of orange groves and multi-level supply chain data. They claim a quintillion data points went into this precise, dynamic AI application that will automatically kind of reconfigure the operation if there's a hurricane or a frost or a freeze or a disruption in the supply chain. And so now they can replan the entire business in like 5 to 10 minutes, which is pretty cool. And then another fun story that I love to tell, just because it's really creative, kind of fun. So in Iceland, you may have heard this, everybody's kind of related to everybody else, which makes for very fun family reunions, but difficult to find a mate who's not your cousin. It's a real problem. And so now there's an app for that. So, so some enterprising young app developers built this app that uses the Icelandic genealogy database, kind of like their Ancestry.com database that pretty much all Icelanders participate in, and is available to anybody who's Icelandic. And so they built this app that, this is their tagline, not mine. Their tagline, not mine. You can bump your phones before you bump in bed. So really fun, clever ideas, a lot of them based on advanced analytics or AI, the ones that are really driving value. So we use these kind of to inspire folks. Then we take the ideas and we'll compile them. We'll compile them into a worksheet or whatever. We've kind of got a standard framework for this now that looks a little bit different, but we tag them in various ways. What kinds of solution was it? We better describe it. We'll maybe relate solutions that are, ideas that are related. We'll determine, are they related perhaps to some kind of system upgrade that's going on, and maybe this is not a good idea to implement because the underlying data that we're going to use is going to be changing. And then we'll just kind of tag them in various ways and refine them. And then we start to think about what kinds of data products we're going to build from that. Remember, data is a non-rivalrous, non-depleting asset, so we can package it up multiple ways. We don't need to just get fixated on one way to do it, but we can take a real general approach and say, hey, we're just going to publish our raw data. We're going to create an API, sell access to that API to whomever. That's great. But is that data really consumable by those organizations? Perhaps not. Maybe we ought to find a way to package it in a way that makes it more consumable in terms of maybe some analytics or pre-aggregated data or analysis or reports, or maybe we're going to go the distance and help those buyers of that data actually integrate it into their own systems. So as we do that, the expense gets higher to create those more sophisticated data products, but they become much more directly consumable by a particular type of party. And then we take all these ideas and we plot them. So I'm used to be with Gartner, so I love quadrants, right? So what we do is we rate them we score them on a variety of feasibility characteristics, what their impact is versus what their complexity is. We'll look at things like, do they have some economic impact? Are they scalable, marketable? Do they have some societal and ecological benefit? And then from a complexity standpoint, are they difficult to manage? Do we have technology issues to implement them? Do we have data issues, quality issues, data that's not integrated, or maybe some data that we can't get access to? And do we have potential legal and ethical ramifications for this idea? So we'll rate and then plot those ideas that are high impact and low complexity. Those are the ones that we probably want to deploy, the high priority ideas. Those that are low impact and low complexity, maybe we want to defer or combine. Those that are high impact and high complexity, we probably have to build out some capabilities before we implement them, and that those that are low impact and high complexity, we probably just want to defer altogether. So that's how we go about prioritizing them. And in fact, we're increasingly using AI, and generative AI, to help us initially not only plot those ideas based on those characteristics and what we've learned about the client, but also fill in the gaps. So I showed you this list of, I'll back up, this list of ideas. We'll say, hey, we've created some prompts and some underlying data to help us identify where are some gaps, where are some ideas that we didn't consider, maybe from other organizations. I'll kind of tell you how we do this in a moment using a GenAI tool that we've built. All right, so just some final thoughts, and then I'll wrap up, okay? So first, as I mentioned, I had kind of a gift for all of you, and that is I've built a chatbot that my colleagues call Digital Doug, and it's been trained on all my books and articles and research and podcasts and the 1,000 or so use cases that we've compiled so far in real-world use cases of organizations using data and analytics and AI in innovative and high-value ways. So we use this for a variety, you can imagine the ways we use it internally, but we make it all available to you all for kind of a limited time. I may end up kind of cutting it off and putting a paywall behind it because it is getting a little bit expensive. But have fun with it. Use it to ask any kinds of questions that you might ask me. Just send me I'm not sharing it with everyone, so send me a DM on LinkedIn or email me, and I'll get you access to it. So. And then just finally, just some general recommendations. Because data is a non-rivalrous, non-depleting asset, you want to monetize it in multiple ways. You want to monetize data that's accessible to you. You want to monetize it not just externally, but also externalize your data. Follow a traditional product design approach. Involve very key people in that. I showed you how to gauge your ideas, measure the cost and upside of the data, one thing I really didn't talk about much about, but applying the economics of data, something that I've been working on with my MBA students, is developing some real thought leadership around how to apply classic economic models like supply and demand and productivity frontiers and marginal utility, how to apply that to data, and what can data leaders, data architects, and business leaders learn from doing so. So that might be my next book if my wife allows. So anyway, that's about it. Happy to take a few minutes for some questions. One question, and then what I'll do is I'm going to go out and get another coffee, and if anybody wants to scoot out, ask me any questions or talk to me about your own situation, I'm happy to address it. Unfortunately, I've got to leave this afternoon because of a medical issue in my family. So I'll be around probably through lunch, but love to chat with anyone. So thank you. Thank you. Question?
Okay, one question.
Make it a good one.
Oh, you wowed them already. They're just going to contact
Leave 'em with
you
too
on
much,
your
yeah.
digital.
Sure.
So you'll be okay
Yeah.
on
The
that.
one question that always comes up is, when is data going to be a recognized balance sheet asset? And I say, raise your hand if you're a CFO or a CEO. Imagine you're a CFO or CEO. Now raise your hand if you want to report on more publicly than you already do. So I think that the icons of industry are influencing the accounting profession to not include data as an asset because organizations like to kind of keep that as a bit of a secret sauce. So that's kind of my impression. But the AICPA and FASB and other accounting organizations have been discussing it. They've published some position papers on it, so it may be coming someday. All right.
Okay.
Thank you, Mary.
Well, thank you, Dave. Doug.
Thank you.